All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Yeah, I'm glad you didn't wear the jersey. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome, welcome. We thank you for being here. We understand, as John's outfit references, that we had competition for this time. But we appreciate you choosing. As I told John, the second half, you'll still have plenty of time to watch the second half of the game, and they'll have a 3-touchdown lead by then. And you didn't want to sit out there, for those of you who thought about actually going. You didn't want to actually sit out there today. I mean, it would have been cold and wet, so you're inside with us, and we appreciate you being here. During the last budget process, we included funding to have a few of these throughout the year. We've already done one, and we have more to go. So we thank you for being here. So the way this works is we are going to sit up here and answer all your questions. That's basically the format. So if you have questions, please raise your hand. You'll get a note card. They'll get the note card to me. There's a city manager standing right over there. On the right. If you need any assistance with language, with helping write it down or anything like that, our staff is available, and they are all here, and they will help you in any way and make sure that we assist. So that's kind of it. It's not complicated. We're here to hear your questions and provide answers. The way I'm going to do this is I'm going to pose each question to one of the members of council. They'll give the first answer, and then any other members who want to chime in on that issue, it's up to them. Not everyone has to chime in on every single question. We have a lot of questions. We want to get to all of your questions. So in fact, I would discourage everyone from chiming in on every single question. But if you have something to add that's insightful, please do so. We're going to try, I see already as I'm looking at the questions that there are a couple of topics that obviously have a whole bunch of questions. And so I'm probably going to try to stay in a topical format here to get through everything. So, but that's the plan. So, Vice Mayor, you had a question.
I do have a question. Can we phone a friend? I mean, I see some staff members here.
We will. The way we will do that is if we have something that's complicated that requires a more detailed answer, we will handle those offline. But we do have a lot of staff that are here. Our department heads, our deputy city managers, leaders from throughout our city agencies. So if there are specific situations and things like that, we'll have members who will be here to address those. Our goal is to get through all your questions. So we don't want to leave any that are unanswered. But if we run out of time, members, I'm sure, will hang around and answer questions specifically one-on-one. So, all right. Actually, Sarah will do that. We'll leave Sarah here. She'll stay for she said as long as you want is what she said. So as long as you buy her dinner, lunch, whatever else. All right. So thank you all for being here, and we'll go ahead and get started. So the first question I'm going to go with is what are the key issues to be included in the legislative priorities in anticipation of the upcoming General Assembly session? Councilman McPike and I are on the legislative committee, so I'm going to turn this one over to Councilman McPike. Councilman McPike, you go for that one.
Absolutely. Is this on? Working okay? Great. I have to hunker down. First, I'd like to thank everybody for coming out here today and for our staff for being here on hand. Every year in advance of the legislative session, the city prepares a legislative packet that includes priorities highlighted by not only our staff, but also by the commissions of our residents who live and work in the city. For instance, the Transportation Commission, I was at the meeting of that on Wednesday night, and they were discussing what they were going to submit to Sarah Taylor, our Assistant City Manager and Legislative Director, in terms of their priorities for this coming session. We don't know the political makeup of the General Assembly coming into this session yet, so I think the complexion that we get from red to blue down in Richmond will probably determine a little bit what we swing for, but there are certain topics that we are always looking for. We are always looking for more ability locally to encourage the production of affordable housing, to address some of our long-term challenges like flooding with funding from states to make sure that if the state is providing flooding, resources to other areas of the Commonwealth, that Alexandria is getting included in that as well. We're definitely going to be looking at some of our transportation policies. Just this past week, our speed cameras in school zones went up. And we know that we have a real problem at certain times of night, certain parts of the city with speeding through residential and sort of arterial roads that we'd really love to be able to address with some automated enforcement. But under Virginia law, we presently cannot. So the state budged a little bit and gave us the ability to put some cameras in school zones, and we're putting those in as fast as we can. We're collecting that data, and we're going to use that to go down to Richmond in January and February and argue that we should have expanded authority here, that we should have this tool, we can show that it works, and go forward from there. Obviously, a regional priority is going to be the WMATA budget shortfall. A few years ago, the region came together with our state and federal leaders to help WMATA get in a good place with their capital investment program. So right now, WMATA has a really strong plan for how it's going to pay for the capital improvements it needs to keep our service running into the future, but they have a real deficit caused by changing usage patterns in the wake of the pandemic in terms of their operating budget. And the way WMATA is structured, if their operating budget gets impacted negatively, they don't have a lot of flexibility, right? The only thing they can really do is decrease headways, which means greater distance between trains, greater distance in time between buses, which is going to put more people in cars on our streets, which is the last thing we want. Be bad for our climate proposal, our climate initiatives, be bad for traffic in the city, be bad for all of us who have to get around this region. So I think we're going to be working very closely with our neighbors in Arlington, Fairfax, and our allies across the rivers to try to get Virginia and our other states in the area involved in helping WMATA address this challenge so that our metro system will continue to function. So those are probably some highlights of things you'll hear us talk a lot about as we get closer to the legislative session.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Pike. Are there anybody else who wants to chime in on that? Councilmember Bagley, and then Vice Mayor Jackson, and then Councilman Chapman. Everyone doesn't have to chime in on every question. So,
Yeah.
Councilmember Bagley.
I'll be brief. I'll just throw in, I think mental health and learning loss in youth is something I think we're hearing at various board and commission levels. We're hearing from families. And so I think we'll see asks related to increased funding on mental health issues and funding looking to address learning loss and out of school time opportunities for children.
Okay, Vice Mayor Jackson.
Thank you. I just wanted to also remind everybody that if you have anything that you would like to include in our legislative packet, I believe we have to get our ideas and suggestions to our legislative director, Sarah Taylor, by October 1st. So let us know if there's anything, well, or before would be good, since we have to get it to her by the 1st. So let us know. Thank you.
Councilman Chapman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to highlight three things that I think General Assembly is hopefully going to talk more about. The Housing Trust Fund, putting more money into the State Housing Trust Fund. We are definitely in the bottom half of the nation as it relates to money in our Housing Trust Fund. And as we all know, quality of life and affordability of housing in the state is growing less and less affordable year by year, and so making sure that we have real state resources for different parts of the state to make sure we can create affordable housing. Another couple of things I want to highlight is we're going to continue talking about schools, whether it's school construction and maintenance, and teacher and employee pay. Those are some big conversations that continue to happen probably year after year in the state so that we can catch up, because we are near the bottom for that as well. And then lastly, one of the things that I'm going to talk about a lot more is state employee pay. One of the things that we struggle with here is that we have to greatly subsidize state employees that work in our jurisdiction. That might be health department employees. That might be our sheriff's department. All of them are supposed to receive a certain compensation based on state formulas, but those formulas are woefully inadequate for what our employees need. And so frankly, you are being double taxed by your state taxes and local taxes to pay for those state employees, and that is not appropriate or fair.
Okay. Staying on the same topic of state issues, I don't know if Councilman Aguirre, you want to take a swing at this one. Would the City Council be willing to review and potentially pass a resolution addressing the issue of money in politics? The resolution has been shared with Council. Go for it.
Does he have it?
So from my understanding, and thank you to Nancy for having brought this forward, there was a resolution passed in 2010. So for essentially anything to pass the council, you need 4 votes. So you would need 4 members to be in support of something around this. Personally, I'm a bit conflicted. While I do believe in getting big money out of politics, it's, as a person of color, it's also difficult to be able to raise money, and as a politician of color, it's a little bit more difficult. So then it's hard already kind of starting off with one hand behind your back, and then having to put another one behind your back makes it even harder. So I wish everybody would play by the rules, but that's not kind of the reality that we're living in. But I'm still open to discussing it, and I'm curious what some of my other colleagues would think about this as well.
Okay, Vice Mayor.
Thank you. I too want to thank Nancy Morgan for bringing this forward too. I think all of us, she's probably spoken to most of us. I know she had a request in to me as well. But I also agree with my colleague and what he has said so far. Local politics is really hard, especially when there's 7 of us having this race at the same time as school board members at the same time, as there's an election in Virginia every year. If you did not know that, you should. And we got to keep our eye on the prize right now with the General Assembly. Early voting has started, and feel free to go anytime before November 7th. But to the politics and the money, it's really hard. I mean, a lot of us, well, I shouldn't say, a few of us the other day were just discussing this as well, and it is extremely hard when we know that we are all running in the same race and all trying to fundraise from a really engaged group of people. I'm sorry, I'm looking at Nancy, but I should be looking at all of you. And a lot of you, of course, want to have, hopefully most of us, we're 7 Democrats up here, continue to be on council. And of course, we have a lot of others that, would be great on council as well. It's like building our bench. So for local politics, that's really hard. That is really hard. And I agree with Canick completely on that.
Okay.
Anyone else?
So we got a few that are kind of like requests, and I'll just read them, and I think we will task staff to look at them. This is one that hits close to home. I would like to request clearer signage of the King Street Metro and the bus loop indicating how to walk to Amtrak. I have gotten very turned around a couple of times trying to find it. So we'll take that for our staff, have them take a look at the signage at the station and see what opportunities we have working with our partners to improve that signage. I'm going to go, we have 2 questions I'm going to give to Councilwoman Gaskins. These are around homelessness. So the first one is, what strategies will council use in the next year to reduce homelessness in Alexandria? And the second one is, are there any plans to build another homeless shelter in Alexandria? Councilwoman Gaskins can take a swing at those.
Thank you, and thank you for the question. What I would say is I think there are a couple different ways that we are looking at this. First, the city does have a task force that's focused on preventing and ending homelessness. And so one of the key roles of that task force is they're starting to do a deeper dive into the data around kind of what are the root causes of why we are seeing an uptick. I think for many of us, homelessness is feeling a lot more visible. We're seeing more and more of our neighbors on the street. And so making sure that we understand kind of what's driving that, but also how are we wrapping around and supporting people as best as we can with housing and shelter first, and then connecting them to the services they need. I think we are also in active conversations with not only our city shelter, but Carpenter Shelter, to understand that as they have pivoted to become a shelter that primarily serves families, what does that mean for single men and women, and how do we ensure that we have enough beds and support in order to be able to meet that need? So all that to say, like, we have our task force is actively seeing what you're seeing. They are on the streets. I know every January we do our point in time count to be able to come forth and put forth a plan for where we go from here. I will say I have not been in any conversations that have focused around potentially a new shelter. I don't think that's a conversation happening right now. What I would say is that there are conversations around what are the resources needed to be able to fully meet the need? What is the cost that it takes to be able to wrap around not only an individual, but their families and to provide those supports. And I think as we begin to get more of those numbers, that's an opportunity for us to then take a step back and see then what's the system we need to be able to address that.
Okay, Councilman Aguirre, then Vice Mayor Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I agree with my colleague. The only thing that I would add is that, we did assist in the expansion of the Carpenter Shelter because we do understand that the situation with the unhoused is extremely, extremely difficult. And being in such an expensive area, I think about, I was just talking with some folks from back home in LA, and the unhoused situation is just exploded, right? San Francisco, Seattle, numerous places across the country where housing is just really untenable. And I think the other thing, when we're talking about the second shelter that we have in the city, we're also discussing, the potential of expanding the size of that so that there's more rooms there. But again, the expansion of rooms is only, the crisis situation. It's not really dealing with the root cause of the issues. And I think the second thing that we also have to be looking at is that many times, and this is across the country, this isn't just Alexandria, we are equipped to just deal with crisis, reaction, when we need to also be looking at resources to transition folks, right? Because as soon as you hit the benefit cliff where all of a sudden you might lose your Medicaid, you might lose a housing voucher, you might lose something else, we need to be able to support people through that transition as well so that they can be successful.
Vice Mayor.
Thank you. And piggybacking off of that, in terms of what we always react to, we do need to be proactive as we're looking at, commercial to residential conversions. Can people, developers, property management, can they come to the table and maybe have some of those units put aside for people in need like that, as we're also working toward the affordable housing aspect of that? This is where homelessness, we are seeing an increase, but you also have to realize we're back to pandemic levels of food insecurity in our city. Alive is working overtime. Thank goodness we have them for our food drives and continuing to provide pop-up locations for our residents that need food. These are the people that need to make choices between putting food on the table for their families as well as paying their rent or mortgages. And they may be choosing to have to get food, but also living in a way that they cannot afford their rents or mortgages anymore. We're seeing our eviction relief process skyrocket. I know our staff of course is here and working to help all our residents in the community moving forward. But it's definitely just a piece of the puzzle that we need to work on and address in our city going forward.
Okay. Councilman Chapman, you'll go with this one. I live in an area where there is a large ethnic population. Who of you speaks for them? This is a very white audience. Which one of you is responsible for addressing the issues that affect my part of town?
So I think as long as I've been on council, we've had at-large council members. And so it is the duty of each of us, each of the 7 of us, to work as hard as we can to represent each and every one. Different communities, different neighborhoods, different ethnic backgrounds, different ages. It is not acceptable, at least in my perspective, for any of us to just pigeonhole ourselves within an area, within a certain expertise. I could only represent black males, but that doesn't do very good in this community. And so we have to work very hard to not only understand and see the perspectives of each of the individuals here. In terms of talking to this crowd or even adding more people to this crowd, I think it's also incumbent on council members to reach out to community members that we don't see often, so that we understand their perspective. We know what they're going through. We can't act like if we don't see it, it doesn't happen. That's not acceptable. And so as we continue to do these town halls, I think the outreach from council members, you'll see that personal outreach to communities across the board, across our city, to try to get as much representation of each of the different perspectives and dynamics in this city at these town halls, asking questions, being able to participate and feel that they are able to participate. Because as we all know, each of us has a different story here in Alexandria, and we go through different things, and any of those, all of those, frankly, should be able to be addressed by council members, either individually or as a whole.
Councilwoman Gaskins and Councilman Aguirre.
Thank you. I just wanted to lift up that our community engagement strategy should never just focus on one meeting. This is one way that we are reaching out and engaging to community. It's not the only one. So when you talk about engaging some of our diverse communities across the city, I think a really good example is what we're starting to see with the Alexandria West Plan. In that particular planning process, we are working directly with folks who are community organizers, for folks who live in some of our large apartment complexes. We're not having town halls, we're having community barbecues. We're sitting in people's living rooms. We are trying to find other ways to meet people where they are. I think you'll also notice in this room, we've also put extensive funding and resources into making sure that we have translation and, listening to the community. And so initially, when I think about Alexandria West, we had translation in Amharic and Spanish and I think Arabic. Now we have it in Dari and Pashto. And so I would just say that while this room may not be representative of all of Alexandria and all the voices, I think it should also be clear that this is not where the conversation stops and that we are constantly seeking and looking for new ways to be able to meet each of our residents. Another thing that we've also done in the budget is that there's now funding to begin to look at childcare and food at certain meetings, so that it's not just town halls, but when we have board and commission meetings, if you want to engage, how do we take away any barrier that might prevent you from being a member at that table and saying the things that are on your mind? So just wanted to lift up some of those other pieces. And I believe our director of communications is here, but I believe on our website you can also find some of the different ways that we are having meetings and forums and different even sitting on buses to actually talk and do surveys directly with people as they are on their daily commutes. And you can find out more about some of that engagement on our website.
Okay, Councilman Aguirre.
First off, I agree with both of my colleagues with everything that they've just said, and I just want to stress as well one more time that we are all at large. We represent all of the residents of our city, and the onus is upon us to make sure that we are doing the proper outreach to each one of the communities within our city. Personally, I've been doing this for the last decade because I was working in the school system. I helped start the Family and Community Engagement Center. I was working at every single school across the city, working in all the different pockets with all the different ethnicities. And, when I moved on to work in the Medicaid sector, I was working across all of Northern Virginia doing the very same exact thing and still working here in Alexandria as well. I've been a major proponent of meeting people where they are, pop-ups, being at laundromats, being at grocery stores, being at bus stops, being on the bus. So that's extremely important to me personally. The other part of it is, multilingual communications, making sure that we're putting out information in more than one language. One note for everyone: translation is written, interpretation is spoken. So today we have multiple interpreters. But with Alex West, we also have documents that we've translated into other languages as well. Personally, I could tell you that in the past month, I was at the Ethiopian Eritrean Club at the high school. I was at an event for the Afghan community. I was at a roundtable with Latino residents. And then the other aspect of this as well is with our business owners, right? Because our business owners have a variety of different backgrounds as well, and making sure that we're doing the appropriate outreach to our business owners, making sure that they're included and that we could try and provide as much information to them in different languages as well. So, and the last thing that I'll mention as another aspect for engagement, I just passed around a memo to my colleagues. I'll be introducing it at the next legislative meeting, but essentially creating a web page where we could kind of house all of the engagement activities that we're doing across the city, so that you could just go there, scroll down the page, find what you're looking for, and interact with it directly, as opposed to having to go to planning and zoning page and then click on this tab and then click on that tab and then I might finally get there, right? So we're trying to make things a little bit easier to interact for all of our residents.
Okay, a related question. I can go to the vice mayor on this one. And then I don't know if others are going to want to weigh in. Obviously, the questioner asked for everyone to weigh in. What is the posture of each member of the city council regarding returning the city council elections to the ward system, and why?
So the ward system. So as we heard earlier, most of us, I think, do a really great job of going out to our unique neighborhoods in Alexandria and meeting people where they are and having that engagement with everybody at different levels. I, for one, am not a fan of the ward system. I would prefer to be at large for that very reason. I like to know all the puzzle pieces in the puzzle, and I would be concerned to have different people trying to vie for funding, things like that on council, that you have like a really big area like Del Rey, right? Going against a really small area in the West End. And maybe that small area in the West End isn't represented as well in terms of advocacy, in terms of the number of people that are engaged versus another side of our city. So I prefer having all the pieces in the puzzle in front of me instead of just knowing I am just for this group right here and can't advocate for my city, since, Alexandria has been special to me. I grew up here, so it would be very difficult for me to be part of a ward system.
Anybody else want to weigh in on that? Councilman McPike, Councilmember Bagley, Councilman Chapman.
Sure. I agree with the vice mayor. I would not be, I think, particularly supportive of returning to wards. Wards, I think, tend to foster competition and division between parts of our city, and a lot of the challenges that we face need to be a whole city effort to address them, where we don't want one part of the city or another bearing more of the weight of some of our challenges because their representative isn't as effective or is newer, whereas under this current system, we all care about everyone, and we can take a broad view on issues such as some of the flooding issues that we have in the city that affect a very small, geographic area, but are incredibly expensive to address. We need to be, I think our at-large system helps us sort of muster the will to address those things, whereas under a ward system, you may have one member of council pushing to address that while the other 5 look at it and that's not really affecting the people that I'm representing. Here it affects the people that we're representing because we represent all of you. I'd also, point out that the system that we have now has produced probably the geographically and demographically most diverse council that the city has ever had. We have 4 people on the council who are west of Quaker Lane. I'm the closest member of the council who lives to this building here, this new beautiful building. I live just over the other side of the highway by Alexandria Hospital. And we have, diversity amongst ethnicities and sort of backgrounds as well. So I feel like we're getting a very representative and responsive council, and I don't think that we should really mess with that success.
Councilman Chapman.
So I have a little bit of a different take. I do agree with my, overall, I do agree with my colleagues about not returning to a ward system, but I've been very interested in DC system of ANCs, or advisory neighborhood commissioners. These are volunteers that are at the hyper-local level. If we introduce something like that, so neighborhoods had somebody that they could point to for their neighborhood representation to talk about kind of hyper-localized issues, I think that might serve some of might solve some of the issues that folks that I hear talking about wards talk about. I think this is probably the first time that the southeast quadrant of Old Town doesn't have somebody on council in probably, several decades. And so I've heard a lot from those individuals in particular because they have seen a loss of a local representative in their neighborhood. And we do have neighborhoods that have a similar feeling. And so I think there's an opportunity to have that larger discussion about, is there another layer that we could have there? I do think, to Councilman McPike's point, the larger issues of transportation, of infrastructure, we don't want to be competing neighborhood against neighborhood for that. We want to, as you might see in some of the national issues, if there is a hurricane in Florida, you don't want to pit money from Florida versus money from New Jersey if they have a similar hurricane. You want everybody to get a solution to the issues that they have problems with. And I think, as was said, you have wards or neighborhoods pitted against each other if you move to a ward system. And frankly, our city history has shown that.
Councilmember Bagley.
As the sole remaining Old Town voice, I second sort of the idea generally that I think, for all the reasons stated, I think our current model has produced a diverse geographically and sort of background and personal life position, a diverse group. So at present, I think it's a solution sort of looking for a problem. I think if we repeatedly saw 5 or 6 members coming from east of Quaker, west of Quaker, and and I want to just join and second the idea that I lived in DC for 13 years prior to moving to Alexandria, and understand and like that concept as well. Also for a slightly different reason, which is we have thousands of people in the city who are not in an HOA, who are not in, there isn't a, I happen to be covered by Notice, the North Old Town, Civic Association, but there are thousands of residents who either because they're a renter or because of the quirk of their geography are don't have a letterhead that captures sort of their point of view. So I think not so much wards, but I think this is a concept that I'd certainly work with my colleague on to help give a voice to what can feel kind of like a disenfranchised portions of the city in that regard.
Okay. I'm just going to say no. Okay. Councilwoman Gaskin.
Thank you. Well, since they asked for everyone, I figured we were just kind of bouncing around. What I would say, I think, is similar to what's been said. I definitely agree with the statement from my colleague, Councilmember Chapman, and sort of figuring out what's that next level of engagement that is neighborhood specific, that we could really find ways to be more intentional and targeted and bringing into the conversation. What I would also say is every time I hear this question, often my mind goes to what's at the root of it. And I think this is directly connected to some of the community engagement questions we just finished answering, which is that if there are folks who feel that they do not have a responsive council, then I don't think just having a ward or district model is going to be the answer to that, because you could get somebody in that position who they're just not responsive, period. I did a lot of work, and if Sarah mentioned Councilmember Bagley mentioned living in DC, I used to do a lot of work with the DC Council, and I can tell you residents who I used to work with in Wards 7 and 8, they would constantly talk about, we've always had representation, but we're still facing the same issues today that we saw 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and 15 years ago. So I think that there's also other ways to tackle this, both one of the suggestions that has been mentioned here, but also I think continuing to push this thing of what is the expectation of responsiveness that we have from those that we elect and have in these positions? How do we create those systems? And if somebody is just not doing that, then I think it's on the voters to be able to vote people who are going to be responsive to the questions and concerns that they have.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor,
Yeah, Councilman.
just since I asked for everybody to ask, I'll just keep it brief. No, I'm not in favor of the ward system for many of the reasons that were already given.
Okay. So there are a couple topics that I got a whole bunch of questions about. You can imagine what this one is right here, this section. And we're going to get to that, obviously. But I want to make sure we get to some other topics. This is one that we got a few questions about. I'm going to start with Councilmember Bagley. And I'm going to read 3 different questions all on the same topic. So I'm concerned about the escalating violence and criminal activity on South Reynolds. I understand that some steps were taken this week, but what are the other short and long-term plans? I have lived in the city for over 25 years. I have not seen gun violence and social decay like we are seeing over the last 2 years. What can we do to improve the situation? What is being done to address the continued and escalated violence throughout the city, and also the accurate and timely reporting of these crimes?
Okay. Thank you. Sorry, I was just taking some notes because there were, I think, three different questions in there. So to kind of to break down pieces of this, we do have some geographically specific issues, and they require sort of geographically specific responses. South Reynolds was referenced. We also obviously have some spikes that we're seeing at near the Braddock Road Metro, and so those specific sort of hot spots, for lack of a better word, are getting some heightened or specific responses, such as some additional cameras in the area, both those you see and those you don't, that are being used to help sort of build cases connected to specific violence. They are also having, I believe it's South Reynolds APD, and I see Captain Ballantyne in the back, but I believe we're working on having some residential officers added to that area, and I see nods. So those are some specifics. So between deploying some additional cameras, deploying some additional people, we've also had some success lately with something called a flock camera. Don't ask me to tell you the exact acronym, but it's they're piloted around the city, and they capture in real time license plate activity, and you can tap into them and quickly find out, is this car a part of a criminal event, or is the owner registered to this car somebody we are looking for? And in my own ride along about 10 days ago, I got to see that play out, where the owner and the driver of a vehicle had a warrant, and he was arrested that evening. So in terms of some specific tools, I'd say cameras, increased focus patrols, and then that particular tool. I also want to highlight one simple thing I will implore all of you and anybody else you know is keep your vehicles locked. As obvious as that sounds, so much, or not, a portion of the crime we are seeing in the community is tied not only to cars being broken into, but then things being removed from them, like firearms. That's a frequent, way in which firearms are, getting moved around in the community. So, please lock your doors. I've seen the sheriff's office and APD has been sending around this tweet around 9 o'clock each night, saying, it's 9 o'clock. Have you locked your car, locked your front door, locked your back door? Some real basic things, but, keep an eye out. Captain Ballantyne's nodding back there, so I think I'm getting this right. So these are some sort of practical core things. We also have our body camera program, which is being successfully rolled out. We're about 60% into the rollout right now, I think. We're adding more every 30 days or so. But I know that the officers I'm speaking to have found it very empowering, and are sort of, they're getting more into the community, and they're more comfortable and confident that they can be in the community, they can get out of their vehicles, they can have interactions, because they feel like those body cameras provide a dual level of security and accuracy for everybody involved in sort of a police interaction. And then the reporting issue, I want to put a pin in that and say one more quick thing, which is, unfortunately, and I don't want this to come off like a dodge at all, but I do want to, it's relevant for my personal response to this question. My day job is in housing, and I work in 12 states around the country. And unfortunately, what Alexandria is experiencing is a nationwide problem. It doesn't diminish our responsibility to address it, but I do want to just give that context, that I spend a lot of time in places like, North Dakota and Georgia and Kansas, and there were a volume of guns sold and distributed during the pandemic that are now in our communities, is sort of the bottom line, and they're out there. And so nationwide, we are dealing with this. We are also dealing with a challenge that isn't just Alexandria's, to meet authorized strength numbers with police departments. Police departments around the country are facing this issue. So again, that's not a dodge. We continue to, our collective bargaining agreement, I think, has strengthened our ability to hire and retain. I saw just the other day an announcement of an officer coming to us laterally. So, investing deeply into our department so that they can recruit, they can retain. But I did want to give that context. In terms of the communication piece, and I feel like I've gone really long, but hopefully I'm keeping everybody's attention. The communications piece, can I share, Ebony, I don't want to put Ebony on the spot, but Ebony is our communications specialist and leads that department. But we are in the midst of investing further in our communications department, adding roles there, both directly with APD and with our communications office with the city. And I think feel like I have seen increased sort of communication, but there is a focus on that. There is a hiring focus on that, and it is our intention to provide transparent information as promptly as possible.
Thank
I'll
you,
pause
Council-
there, sorry.
thank you, Councilmember Bagley. Vice Mayor,
Thank
and then
you.
Councilwoman Gaskins, then Councilmember Pike.
I think Councilwoman Bagley did a magnificent job going over all of that. Thank you. I do want to bring up a couple of other things just in terms of the engagement portion that you all can be a part of as well. We have rolled out community barbecues that the police force, our police department, our sheriff's department, everybody, all staff, we are all invited in these certain neighborhoods. They'll start rolling them out again, but they're likened to National Night Out, where everybody does it the same night, but the community barbecues that go on, that you can go and engage with our law enforcement, find out what's going on. You can talk to them personally at these barbecues. It's not just one or two of them. It's usually the probably about 10, 5 to 10. I also want to say Marcel Bassett is here. He is our PIO at the police department, and also does a great job along with Ebony Fleming, our communications director. When you go to farmers markets, I've also noticed they are giving out free the steering wheel locks. What are those called? The club. Thank you. And I know when I was over at Southern Towers the other day talking to some law enforcement officers, they had probably 5 or 6 boxes just there for like Kias and Hyundais. But you just have to ask. They were giving them out for free. So if you need anything like that for your car as well, again, to go back to what we were discussing with the locking your car doors, locking your front doors, making sure just everything that you have control over is secured. And that would go a long way with a lot of the crime that is being seen. Also, if you have a Ring camera, if you have those videos and you know something has happened, please get in touch with our police department so that they can help. That's what they're there for. I was talking with someone the other day. If you don't know the non-emergency number to our police department, please feel free to use the 911, because that will automatically in the switchboard take them to the non-emergency number if needed. There are more than one line for 911. There's more than one person on that switchboard. So don't wait if you think it's a non-emergency to find out what the non-emergency number is. Okay, so also wanted to just make sure that everyone is aware that we are working on it. We hear you. I think even the mayor has met with the Reynolds Street Property Management the other day personally to make sure that things are going in the direction of safety and security in our city in these localized areas where there's a heavy crime presence. Thank you.
The non-emergency number, though, is 703-746-4444. Councilwoman Gaskins and Councilman Pike.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Got to make sure people know that.
I know.
I just wanted to touch on one other dimension of this, because I think Councilmember Bagley did a great job talking about kind of our work to quickly apprehend those who are responsible and the tools we're investing in to make sure we have the data and information we need when an event does happen. So I think that's one piece. I think the Vice Mayor touched on this other piece around community-oriented policing and what we're doing to be out in the community. I think another critical element that sometimes folks don't always see is the work we're doing around prevention. So when I think about some of the recent issues and violence that we've been seeing around South Reynolds Street, there's a whole team of our staff that has been meeting not only with property management, but with residents. Because what we have found is in one particular property, there was a point where they have had over 6, I think maybe 7 or 8 different property managers in the past 2 years. There was a point where 4 months went by where they had no property management at all. That things are not getting fixed, things breaking, pipes bursting, maintenance issues, other things happening within this setting where if you live in a place that nobody is even taking care of, you have no place to go to when there are issues happening, that is devastating. In the same building, they lost their their early care and education center. They lost all of these other pieces, so the resources and supports that were wrapping around that building, and then on top of that, you throw a pandemic. And so it is a team of representatives from APD, from code enforcement, from DCHS, who I think the health department as well, others from our libraries, trying to figure out at every step of the way, what do we do to wrap around you as our neighbors as well, to identify, what are the root causes, but also if there are folks in the buildings who are causing the issues, that we can identify those folks, we can address that quickly and respond. So I just wanted to also put that layer in, because I think this is all a piece of it. It is, what do we do quickly when an incident happens, but what do we do to make sure that an incident doesn't happen again?
Thank you, Councilwoman Gaskins. Councilman McPike.
So not surprisingly, Councilwoman Gaskins got to what I was going to say about prevention. But so fundamentally, I just want to say that this is a real issue. This is something we take seriously. This is something that we will continue to take seriously. Everyone in Alexandria should feel safe in their home. They should feel safe walking through their neighborhood. They should feel safe when they go to a store, go to church, go to synagogue, go to wherever they might be going in our city. And we are investing a great deal in public safety. Over the last 2 budgets, we've made significant investments in our police, in our fire. We've also made investments in out-of-school time programs to help keep young people engaged in positive things and away from things that might drag them towards criminal activity. But that's not to say that we've done this and that's it, right? We need to now make sure that we're getting the results we want to see. At this coming Tuesday's legislative meeting, we're going to receive an update on crime statistics in the city. I think we're going to have a lot of questions for the chief and the assistant chief who are there about what's next, what more do we need to be doing to address this regional challenge, yes, but the way this regional challenge is impacting the lives of people in Alexandria. And it's not going to be something that's going to fall off our radar screen, because this is incredibly important and probably one of the 2 or 3 most pressing issues in the entire city right now.
Okay, and let me tack on myself on this one. So I think a couple of my colleagues made reference to some of the specific challenges we're having on Reynolds, and I think those challenges are real, and I think they are unfortunately very specific to Brent Place, and we have seen that complex become really a magnet for criminal activity. The calls for service, that is our #1 location for calls for service in the city of Alexandria by far, not even close. And we've seen large increases in calls for service in that site. I think, as Councilwoman Gaskins made reference to, a lot of those issues I believe, can be traced to the root of management challenges in the building. To give you a frame of reference, about half of the units in Brent Place today are either empty or are essentially not paying rent at all. And so there is a real challenge in that building right now with management. As was referenced, I did meet last week with the owners. It is owned by a nonprofit. It is privately held, and it is committed affordable. The nonprofit recently replaced their management company. There is a new management company that just took over at the beginning of the month. And so they're working to get their arms around what's going on there. I think we have provided some very specific asks to them regarding management, regarding security, things that will improve the quality of life for residents not only in Brent Place but throughout the corridor. We have provided dedicated policing resources on Reynolds. That will continue. There was just a walk last week. There will be continued resources on that corridor for a while to come until we can deal with these challenges. So I think these challenges are very real, and the city is taking them seriously to address them. I think it's important to note that these are not all policing challenges. These are challenges that have at their root a lot of other city services, and we're working to align the array of city services to address those issues. So. One, I'm going to put in that other group of things we'll follow up on. There was someone who asked, can there be more police presence at Willow Run? And so we'll make sure we follow up on that. There is another question. I'm going to just take, and if anyone wants to follow up, and I imagine we will talk about this a little bit on Tuesday. Someone asked, why are you afraid to let a cop make a traffic stop? A ticket in the mail a month later doesn't slow down traffic in the near term. A cop can take you off the road to write a ticket and not stall traffic flow. So we're certainly not afraid to do traffic stops. The city has committed resources in recent years to traffic enforcement. However, it is important to note that our enforcement numbers are down dramatically, and that is because of staffing issues. That is, we've diverted resources to address some of the violent crime we're seeing around the city. And so I think one of the things we will probably talk about on Tuesday is how we address some of those challenges so that we can have the level of traffic enforcement that keeps our streets safe. As referenced in that question, we do have red light cameras. We did recently expand or add speed cameras in school zones as allowed by state law. And so we are trying technology-based approaches to address traffic safety, but that's only a piece of it. And so there's no substitute for having traffic enforcement done by police officers out in the street. And so we'll talk about how we get those numbers back. Anybody else want to follow up on that? All right. The Buffalo Bills are leading 10-0, so you're not missing anything right now in the second quarter. So, all right. I'm going to give this one, Councilman Aguirre, why don't you take this one? There's two questions, both related to the same topic. In the yearly budget publication in June of 2010, City of Alexandria compensation philosophy stated that every 2 years, the city would conduct a market study of benchmark positions to determine the competitive posture of the organization. After 12 years of this being included, it was removed in this year's budget publication. Not once was a market study implemented during this time. City staff outside the administration level of the department are still experiencing low salary levels. What do you plan to resolve this? There's another question. One study shows that to bring library staff compensation up to the middle of the surrounding jurisdictions, it would cost an additional $800,000. What will you advocate for with respect to full and fair compensation for library staff in the next budget cycle?
So first off, let me start with the compensation studies. So since 2010, there have been compensation studies, but not specifically to the library. There have been compensation studies almost yearly around public safety for firefighters and police, but I think, and there's been a couple for some of our general scale employees, I want to say in TNES and maybe another department or two. But have we kept to the philosophy that was there in 2010? In my opinion, no. But I also wasn't present on the council at that time. What I can say specifically currently with the libraries, the reason that we're doing a compensation study now is because of me. As a liaison to the library board, this was brought to my attention. I brought this to the attention of my colleagues. We make sure to allocate funding to make sure that this compensation study could occur, and are currently looking to see, the study is almost complete. I think there's still a couple things that are being looked at. Once it's complete, it will be shared more publicly, and we'll see what the amount is, if you will, and then work together on this council to see what we can do specifically for the libraries. But again, we did have the collective bargaining agreement for both our police and fire departments. The general scale employees are looking at organizing and are in the process of collectively bargaining now. Although the library employees are left out of that, I won't get into it, it's a little complicated, but this is the reason that we still needed to do this compensation for the library employees, so that we can bring them up to a more appropriate place in consideration of where we are in the region. Because right now we're essentially at the bottom, and there's no parsing words on that one. So we are working on this. I was unaware that the language was taken out of the budget, but I can assure you that, yeah, we've been doing studies all the time. Maybe we need to take another look at this to make sure that we are getting on an appropriate cycle, to make sure that every department is being looked at every other year, every 2 years, whatever the best way to do it is.
Thank you, Councilman Aguirre. I'm going to go to, Councilman Chapman.
Real quick, several years ago, before our current manager, I proposed to our last manager the idea of doing similar planning to a CIP for employee pay. One of the things that as I know the mayor can attest to, is, and I think it was already mentioned, there has been regular conversation and changes for public safety pay. That was a regular discussion for council pretty much every year during the budget, but not for general scale employees, not for librarians. And I think that type of planning, that type of regular conversation is what's going to keep us competitive in the, throughout the region. Because if we wait, 4 or 5 years to even have the discussion, to even do a study that puts that amount of money that's needed, makes that hole bigger, that gap bigger, but also, honestly, we lose a lot of trust with our staff. And staff, like all of us, as employees, will seek a better opportunity if they know no new opportunity is coming. And so how we not only execute the plans, but make sure we have plans in place and are communicating these plans to our community, but also our employees, I think is very necessary.
Okay. Councilman Chapman, I'm going to give you the next one here. This is kind of yin and yang here. First one is, what is City Council doing to address our need for infrastructure issues, especially those that are still problems? The next one is, I live on the 500 block of East Howell, and we have been going through months of construction. First it was Ting, and now Washington Gas. When can we expect final restoration and paving, and are there any other major projects planned?
Let me deal with the second one first, because that's easier. And I say, thank you for the response, but I say that because one of the challenges is that we are always trying to improve our infrastructure. And whether it is Ting and the work that we're doing, I mean, if you want Comcast to be the only people that we have in the city, and I already see some heads shaking no, there is a level of construction and infrastructure work that needs to happen to make that happen. And so this is the unfortunate time of that, right? Hopefully years down the road, we'll be able to have competitive opportunities for that, for cable and for internet. But we are at a stage right now where we are introducing that infrastructure is being put in across the city. And that means that construction has to be done. Construction is not nice. It's not fun. I can tell you from experience, my street right now is having Washington Gas dig up the road, and we've had to move all over in terms of parking and all types of inconveniences. But it is infrastructure. I don't want any of our houses to blow up because infrastructure has not been done on the gas lines, right? And so there is an unease as it relates to the construction that's being done. But let's understand that it is being done for a lot bigger and longer purpose than just the couple of weeks and maybe months of construction that's been done in our area. And so I think that it's not fun. I won't act like it is, but it is necessary. One of the things that we've tried to do as a city is talk to all of these partners and let them know that we don't appreciate having our roads repaved and then 2 months later or 10 months later, them coming behind and saying, hey, I need to do infrastructure work. We need them to be planning as ahead and as far as possible that we can make the correct plan so that any infrastructure work and construction can be done, and then we can give you a nicely paved road. We had West Taylor Run probably repaved about 3 years ago. And now we've got gas lines being dug up. And so we're going to have inappropriate or incorrect and not a nicely paved road for quite some time just because of that alignment of schedules. And what we are trying to do at the city staff level is really demand of our partners that changes. And so that has been a conversation that we've been ongoing with the various utility partners for some years now as they work to improve our infrastructure, but try to do that in a certain timing. The other conversation was about infrastructure. As far as I can think about it, we have plans for each of the infrastructure issues that we know we have challenges for. I was part of putting together the ad hoc stormwater, we have a long name, it's ad hoc stormwater working group. That's what I'll call it today. And we have been, it's a group of residents that have been talking about how we ensure that our infrastructure as it relates to stormwater is brought up to speed. We know it's going to cost a lot of money, and it has already. We know there are a ton of different projects of different scales that need to be done. And we are working not only as city staff and electeds, but also with the community members to make sure that communities understand what we're doing, what these projects look like, the timing that will be needed, and how we communicate out. One of the beautiful things is that we had some ARPA money, and this group was able to clearly work with staff to align where that money should go for the best impact to hopefully speed up the process of some of the infrastructure work that we're doing as it relates to stormwater. That's one example. We do have a CIP for our schools as well. We have a transportation master plan, and as many of you know, we've been talking about aspects of that transportation management plan. And so we do have a number of plans for infrastructure. We are talking about housing, but we also have a housing master plan as well that kind of lays out how we think we're going to go about housing. As I mentioned, having a master plan or some type of plan about how we keep competitive staff here in the city is necessary as well. And so making sure that we have plans for those areas, and not only have plans, but put the energy and resources behind those plans so that we can execute it, so that with something like stormwater, we can work our way out of a decades-old issue.
Okay. Councilwoman Gaskins?
Thank you. Just one piece I wanted to add on this, because Councilmember Chapman's exactly right. We have so many different plans, whether it is roads, sidewalks, stormwater, and other types of infrastructure. I think the challenge I sometimes hear from residents is that it's really hard to find where all of those plans are and how they fit into each of the different projects you're looking at. So if we are talking about a particular development, unless you're, sitting home at night, flipping through the staff report and going to page 100 and so, you may not see the specific, benefits that we're getting for stormwater. And so I think this is an area where we have an opportunity to improve and really think about how do you communicate that information, but also how do we think about it not just on a project by project basis, but how do the projects coordinate with each other? We know that, your pipes don't just stay on your home, it connects and feeds into a larger system. So this is top of mind for me. I don't know the answer. I was just thinking, just yesterday, I emailed our planning director to see if we have ever experimented with tools like a unified development ordinance. This is a tool in, planning departments talk about it all the time. Usually it's focused on how do you coordinate design guidelines and water management. But, is this a space where it might be an opportunity to coordinate sort of all of these other types of infrastructure reviews and plannings, and having in a clear document where they come in and out of the process, so that somebody can look and say, okay, I just clicked on the website and I don't know when the parking study is coming. I don't know when the sidewalk plan is going to be done. But I do know that based on this is when that review comes in the process. This is how it's being talked about. This is how it's being evaluated. So all that to say, I think I want to assure people, as Councilmember Chapman did, it's happening, it's being planned. I think now it's on us to find ways to communicate where you can easily see those plans and how they connect to the projects you're interested in.
Vice Mayor? Yeah.
Thank you. Just to piggyback off of Councilwoman Gaskins, we need, and our communications director is right here, so I can say, and our city manager. When we go to the website for the city, I don't know about you all, but I think we continually go down rabbit holes that we can't find our way out of. And which is really interesting on one hand, but the other hand is exactly what we were just talking about, is we have all these plans, and they're great plans, and they will eventually all be implemented. However, if we can simplify the process of the residents and the businesses ourselves, anybody that goes to the City of Alexandria website and basically say master plans, click on that, and have all of them there instead of trying to maybe go to each individual thought, right? Each is like, oh, let me look up flooding. Well, yes, it should be there too for the stormwater infrastructure. Or our schools, well, yes, it should be there too. But if we have all the plans in one place, I know it would help alleviate the time that it takes in those rabbit holes, because I know it's fascinating. I am lifelong learner. I am fascinated when I go down those rabbit holes, but I end up being down there a long time and then realizing, did I really come out with the answer I was looking for? And most likely, if I did, it took a really long time and more than it should have. That's when I just call the mayor and I say, where's the link? So,
All right.
thank you.
I'm going to answer this one, other infrastructure one. It says, why is it taking the Duke Street to 395 project so long to complete? This is a state project. This is VDOT. My understanding is they are on the schedule that they published, but we'll verify that and get some information out to the community on that. All right, I'm going to give this one to the Vice Mayor. This will be the last one before we get to Housing Palooza here. So we have a lot of housing questions. So this one is these two questions kind of related. Will the council be making any changes to the property relief for elderly and disabled in Alexandria? Alexandria is a lower amount to qualify than Fairfax, Arlington, Prince William, and Falls Church. And then the second one is many families have benefited from the pilot program Arise, the Alexandria Recurring Income for Success and Equity, the basic income pilot. Will the city considering expanding this in the upcoming budget? So real estate tax, elderly disabled, will we raise that? And then Arise.
So the elderly disabled, I may throw that over to Councilman McPike, since he is on the Aging Commission. For the other, though, I hope we expand it, but that's also a vote for the budget season for council, but I can't imagine that we wouldn't. So, but I'll let.
Sure, I'm happy to talk about
Thank you.
the exemption. What we're talking about here, there's a couple of programs the city has to help people who are retired on a fixed income, who see their property tax bills rising, where you can have your property tax either reduced or deferred until after your home is sold, you know when. So that, it reduces the bill that you have to pay right now. To qualify for this program, you have to meet certain income and asset thresholds. The asset thresholds, they exempt the value of your current home, but they are fairly low in Alexandria. And I do think it'd be worthwhile for us to consider raising these thresholds to allow more people to participate in these plans, particularly the deferral plan, where it doesn't actually cost the city money in the long term, but it does help ease a burden that people are facing right now. So I would be very open to that. That's a process that we have to address in our budget process as part of the, spending and tax portion of the budget.
Okay, Councilman Aguirre, then Councilwoman Gaskins.
I just wanted to touch quickly on the Arise program. We were actually, the mayor and I in this room just a few days ago getting a 6-month update. Really, really great video about another community that was doing a similar program. For those of you that don't know what Arise is, we essentially have 170, and I can't see Ms. Garvey now, but I think that, we have 170 residents that, it was a lottery essentially, picked 170 residents at certain, below a certain area median income that we established, which I think was around $50,000. And we are giving them $500 a month for 2 years. We're part of a network of cities and towns throughout the country that have been piloting this. A lot of the places have had success. In our first 6 months, we've been seeing a lot of success as well. I'm personally very excited about this program. The money's been allotted for 2 years, so it's something that we'll discuss, but we might not have to look at for the budget until the following cycle. But it's I think it's going to be made public, the study that we put out, and will the video be available online? Okay, so the video and the information that we were able to see a couple days ago will be made public and on the website. Again, very exciting program in my mind, in my eyes, and seeing some of the results, because we are partnered with a firm that is doing all the technical data collection so that we can see what's going on with it. Once we get through the pilot, then we'll be able to have more data, more information to make a more informed decision if it's something that we want to continue with, if we want to make some tweaks to, and other adjustments. So TBD on that one, but definitely excited about it.
All right, Councilwoman Gaskins, and actually, I'm going to let you take this one, but I'm going to squeeze in another question for you to answer after you're done with your comments on this one, just before we get to housing. Someone asked, is there an effort to rename streets currently named after Confederate sympathizers? If not, why not? If yes, when will it be completed?
Okay. On the first one, I just wanted to make a really quick point on the elderly tax relief, because this is a program that I'm very interested in. It's critical to our efforts to make sure seniors can age in place and stay in our community. And so last budget cycle, I I did ask for a budget memo on what it would cost to make some changes to this program, as Councilmember Pike mentioned, at both different income levels as well as different asset levels. I would just encourage, if this was your question, you can easily go to our Office of Management and Budget. You just type that in on the website, and it has the budget questions from the previous year, and you can see some of the different scenarios we were looking at. I think it would be really helpful for us as we go into our retreats and budget plannings to understand, like, as we explore that, are those even the right income or asset targets? Are we on track? And being able to have a clear understanding of who might benefit from those types of expansions. So just wanted to plug that in, that this is something we're starting to get more information on. To the second question, myself, Councilmember Chapman, and Councilmember Bagley, we serve on the city's naming committee. Last year, I think it was last year or last fall, the mayor introduced a memo. We had already had a process that residents could come to the city if they got a certain amount of signatures and propose changes to the names of their streets. What the mayor did in that memo is he really raised the point and challenged us that that process is taking forever. And at the end of the day, there are just some streets that are memorializing Confederate generals and participants that are not reflective of the values that we say we hold and should hold, I believe, as a city. And so the naming committee, we spent the first few months kind of outlining a new process for what it would take to be able to accelerate the changing of names of those streets. Now where we are, we've outlined the process, which you can find on the website. I know I'll butcher it if I try and give you all the dates. We have also partnered with the Historic Alexandria Resources Commission, and they have been doing a review of all of the names, trying to track down where did those names originate, who specifically are they referencing, and what is the history of that individual, as well as proposing potential new names. And so starting this fall, I think we are going to begin to make proposals for changing I think we have in the budget, changing 1 to 3 streets. I know we've gotten things from folks who are like, what is the impact? What does this mean for me? It's going to cost me all of this money to make all of these changes. There's actually a really good breakdown on the website that talks about, there's a lot of things where we have our names and address on that you can change that actually don't cost money to change. So that's a really good tool. I'd say there are also streets that range. There are some streets that have 2 to 5 people on them. There are other streets that have thousands of people on them. So we are also being very sensitive to how we think about the impact and which streets we start with or how we roll this out. Other conversations we've had have also been around how do we work directly with businesses and provide them with supports should the name of their street be changed, and sort of what additional technical assistance or costs might they face. So all that to say, this fall, it is an accelerated process. It is moving forward, and there's a lot of research and guidance. And you can also email any of us directly, or you can email all of us as the naming committee if you have suggestions for new names.
Councilmember Bagley.
Just thanks for going over that, Councilmember Gaskins. And just a few more quick facts. Thursday night, September 28th, in the Sister City room at City Hall, this committee will be meeting. So Thursday at 6 o'clock, that committee will be meeting. Those materials will be online, alexandriava.gov, and then put in naming committee. It will take you to sort of the core documents of the street names being considered, some of the alternatives being considered. And then a couple other just context I wanted to provide is most of the streets being considered are on the West End, and there's a reason for that, because literally a year after we absorbed the West End as a city, there was language put in the code of the city saying we are going to name streets after Confederate historical figures. It was proactively done. That's why we're talking about proactively undoing it. So this isn't so much, a set of random streets that over time family members chose or somebody on the street had that name. In 1953, a council made a decision that moving forward, all these streets are going to be named in this way. And that's why we've decided as a group to proactively address that and undo that action. And then the other little tidbit I'll just throw out there is we've done this before. We did it on Route 1. So we know how to do it. We can do hard things. We can do it with businesses. We can do it with homes. We will learn a lot from this first year effort, but I am confident we can do this. We can support our residents and our businesses. And I also think it's necessary work to do.
All right, Councilman Aguirre.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First off, I agree with the comments from both of my colleagues. The other thing I'll mention is that part of what informed the mayor's memo was my budget memo that I've been putting in since I got on the council, which was, how much would it cost to rename all the Confederate streets in the city. The other thing that I want to add, and if we have enough resources that we can allocate, because we know this isn't easy, you're talking about changing your credit cards, Social Security, disability, the list just goes on and on when you have to change your address. So what we want to try and do is provide some resources to our residents to be able to help them through this process as well. So hopefully that's something that we can allocate when we start going through the renaming of some of these streets.
All right, 13 to zip, almost the halftime. Pathetic. All right, we're going to go now to housing. So I'm going to start with Councilman McPike. He's going to answer all the housing questions for the whole council tonight. So thank you.
I don't watch football.
All right, I'm going to give you, I'm going to read one question and then I'm going to read five, or one comment and then I'm going to read five others. I'm going to read the first comment just because I want to make sure that both kind of perspectives are heard. So this is just a comment. Said, I have no questions about zoning for housing since city staff gave excellent answers to my questions at the recent community meeting, but I would like to state that I fully support the proposals and hope to see the city do even more to allow housing in the coming years. Okay, comment. All right, so now here's a bunch of questions. These are kind of, I'm trying to group these thematically. So I'm going to read all these and you can get the theme and go from there. Understanding that laws in Virginia are very weak for renters' rights, is it time we use our power to expose and shame landlords for unsavory practices such as ignoring infrastructure problems and raising rents to obscene levels? This is a huge problem in the city, particularly in larger buildings owned by huge corporations. Low-income families in Alexandria are at risk from being pushed out of the city, so what is the city's plan to stabilize these families? What are you doing to keep residents who are living in relatively affordable homes from being forced out? With all the development happening in the city, what problems will the city place to prevent displacement for those who earn under 60% of area median income? And the final one, somewhat related, why hasn't the city partnered to create more housing for people of $25,000 to $75,000 household incomes as aspired by the master plan guiding principle number 1 of 2014 to 2024? Mr. McPike.
All right. I'm glad the mayor still has the cards because I might not recall all of these. And for anybody who FOIAs my notes from this meeting, the scribble is going to be illegible. So, yeah, this is we're embarking on a real journey over the next couple of months that culminates years of work by the planning department, by this council and previous councils to try to sort of improve the health of the housing market in Alexandria. Right now, our housing market, like in many places throughout the nation and in this region, is in a crisis. And that crisis falls heaviest on those who have the least in our city. And we do a lot in the city to try to help people who are lower income stay in the city, to avoid displacement, to be able to afford a home that is of a quality that they can live in safely and happily. But these efforts that we have are undermined by the general unaffordability and sort of ill health of our housing market as a whole. So zoning for housing is a series of proposals designed to expand housing creation in the city, to improve the health of that housing market, to diversify the offerings that are available to people who want to live in Alexandria, and through doing so, to improve the effectiveness of the programs that we have in place to help those who need greater affordability. To go through some of these questions specifically, what do we do to stabilize? What do we do to avoid displacement? The city has done a number of things. We partner with ARHA to build 100% affordable buildings in many places. Y'all might know about the building going up on Glebe Road that is going to be deeply affordable units. They're right where the Sherwin-Williams that used to be a grocery store is, and that whole little triangle corner there. It's going to be 2 buildings. They're going to provide a significant number of units. Those units are going to be a bulwark against displacement for the Alexandria community, which already faces a serious problem because the landlords that we have in that area are not some of the good landlords in the city in most cases. They don't maintain their properties the way that we think would be appropriate. But when they improve them, they raise the rents and they squeeze people out and they displace them. So we're working to create buildings like that to create a bulwark or a buffer to lessen the threat of displacement, so that if, for instance, Presidential Greens decides to upscale itself en masse, we do not lose the core of our Alexandria community. Around the city, we have other landlords that similarly do not take care of their residences and thus their residents the way that we think they should, whose practices do not reflect the values of Alexandria. And you saw articles in the newspaper recently about some of them, and they deserve that bad press, and the residents of those buildings deserve better conditions. And we have been working in our budget to improve our code enforcement, to expand our tools there, to hold these buildings to greater account. But the best thing we can do to hold them to account is to give them more competition, to allow the creation of housing in this city so that they don't have that sword of Damocles that they can hold over their residents' head, that it's either us or you're leaving the city. When I first ran for city council, I was checking out at the Harris Teeter. It was actually right before I announced, checking out the Harris Teeter on Duke Street. And the checkout woman who was helping me was very upset. And we got to talking because the machine wasn't working right or something. And she was talking about how the fact that her rent had just gone up again. And she now had to leave the city. She couldn't afford to stay in her house. And she's going to have to take her kid out of the only school she had ever attended. And when we talk about these housing questions, we often talk about them at a 50,000-foot view, flying overhead like we don't want the planes doing from National Airport. And we look down at the city and we talk about these things using charts and graphs and numbers, but these are actual human challenges that 17 to 19,000 families across the city, I believe is the number, are facing every single month when they get that rent check. How much of their income is it eating up? By doing the approach that we're trying to take with zoning for housing, we're trying to put a lot of tools on the table to create housing so that these people have options, that they're not going to be competing to keep their apartments against people with greater resources who could instead go to other housing that we create in the city, that we create a healthier housing market in Alexandria to benefit those who are struggling today, to benefit those who live here but want to stay here as they age, to benefit those of us who have kids who we want to have be able to come back to Alexandria after they graduate from school. So I don't know if I've hit every question or point that the mayor raised, but I trust that my colleagues, if I didn't, took better and more legible notes than me and will fill in any blanks that I left.
All right, Councilmember Bagley, then Councilwoman Gaskins.
Thank you, Mayor Wilson, and to my colleague for taking the first big swing. It's a challenging set of questions. What I like about this collection of questions is, am I close enough? What I like about this collection of questions is there's been a lot of talk within our zoning for housing conversation about how much people like, these garden style, this gentle density, like everybody really, really likes those. And I agree, I live in one of those. I live in a 1940s era build, older brick, and that's why it's affordable, okay? But I also haven't had AC for 4 days, and my water's been off and on, because that's what happens in 1940s era, buildings. It's the nature of the beast. And so I think it's important to inject back into, yes, we like these older, modest, gentle density garden style apartments, and we want to keep them in our community, but we need to think about the living conditions for those people in those charming, lovely, gentle density buildings, because the reality is those buildings are not energy efficient. The reality is many of those might have water infiltration issues. They might have heating, insulation issues. And so that's part of why we need to also add to our stock and consider ways where we can rebuild, redevelop. We want to hold on to that style, and I live in one of those styles, but we have to recognize that we have a climate crisis to go along with our housing crisis, and we have to be conscious of, what is the energy efficiency of these buildings? What is the air quality in these buildings? Are people living in really hot situations where they don't have air conditioning in the summer? Are they living in situations where asthma rates are exceedingly higher because air quality is poor in these older buildings? So we can't think about our zoning choices simply based on affordability. It's a key piece, but we just have to also think about the conditions within these buildings and these units themselves. Our country built a lot of housing in the 70s and 80s, and that stuff is now, feeling the effects of that. It is 40 and 50 years old. People lived hard in these units during the pandemic. They were home a lot, opening and closing those cabinets and flushing those toilets repeatedly. And so I'm taking this opportunity to sort of inject that in, that, we want to create more supply, we want to create more stock, stock. We want to create competition. These are all valid reasons to engage in this effort. But also, simply holding on to old things because they're kind of affordable is not something we should take great pride in either. We should think about the living conditions in those units and what we need to be doing to either monitor them or to improve them and replace them. And to that end, it was touched on by my colleague, but in our last budget, we actually added another position into our code enforcement, a rental inspection position, recognizing that these units are aging, people are holding on to them because they're arguably affordable, but you should not have to sacrifice your air quality, your temperature, your insulation, your energy bills just in the name of an arguably affordable unit. And I hate to be so worked up and strident about it, but I think that it's a core piece of this puzzle. Sorry.
Thank you, Councilman Bagley. Councilwoman Gaskins.
Thank you, Mayor Wilson. I was going to say, so when I was getting my master's in urban planning, in almost every housing-related class we had, we talked about the 3 Ps of housing. So production, preservation, and protection. And I think both of my colleagues have touched a lot on the production piece, which is a lot of what zoning for housing is focused on. But I think the other key part of this question was around this protection piece. And what are we doing to make sure that our residents are able to, that they know their rights, they're able to exercise those rights, and be able to stay and live in the housing that they deserve. And so I just wanted to touch on that piece a little, because there are other strategies happening that you're not always going to hear about in the zoning conversation because they're not zoning strategies. So the first, at the local level, I know Sarah mentioned the proactive rental inspections, but we have also it's part of our Alexandria plan, and are also exploring it as part of our Alexandria West plan, looking at community preference policies. So if there are new developments happening in your area, how do we work to have policies in place where you have sort of the first right to come back and be able to have a unit in those buildings? We're also looking at policies. Our Office of Housing has been working with some of our older buildings to see, are there things that we can support related to maintenance? We know that a lot of these buildings, they flip or change or become more expensive when somebody's coming in to do quote unquote upgrades. If we're able to help cover the cost of an elevator, or we're able to help with some of these long-term maintenance strategies, that might be something that then can be, is one more expense that the property management doesn't have to put on, that can allow them to keep the rents lower at a certain level. We also have our Landlord and Tenant Relations Board. While it is suggested guidance, they do put out guidance every single year about what they believe is the appropriate amount of rent increases for the region. The other thing we've been doing is in our legislative package. Some of these things we don't have the authority to do. And so in last year's package, we went to bat for types of legislation that was focused on payment plans for residents. Some folks are working 2-3 jobs, and when you get paid, it's not always on the first day of the month. And so we were seeing in our eviction court proceedings, people who were owing $150 being taken to court. But if they'd had 1 more week or 2 more weeks, they would have got the $150. And so could we advocate for payment plans? We also advocated for things related to giving tenants more rights, that if you have a slumlord, being able to partner with your municipality or other nonprofits to be able to sue and hold those property managers accountable. None of that legislation passed, but we are not giving up. So we're trying to put the full weight. We're going to try again and continue to try and see what is the full weight that is needed on some of those protection-related policies. And then I would also say, in the zoning conversation, I know we've received questions and comments around, when we think about displacement, are there tools like zoning overlays that might be able to be used to protect particular neighborhoods or even particular cultural businesses? I think all of that is part of this as well. So I just wanted to say that we are looking at all 3 parts of the stools and this protection, and making sure that we are not only getting into properties and using the full weight of our code enforcement and health department, but that we're also empowering and supporting people with their rights to be able to stay in and have quality and decent housing.
Okay. I don't know. We'll see. We got more. So there was a factual question that I can just answer here. I did have to do a quick look up to make sure I could answer it factually. But how many of Alexandria's council people live in the areas proposed to be rezoned R25, R5, R8, R12, and R20 in the single-family homes? So I would just note that technically we're not rezoning. There's no proposal to rezone those properties. But the answer to the question on the fundamental question is 3 out of 7. So 3 out of 7 live in those zones. So all right. I'm not going to tell you where everyone lives. You guys probably most people know where we all live. But So, all right, I'm going to go to Councilwoman Gaskins on this one. And there's a series of questions, all again, same theme. So let me, and there's a couple that are comments, so let me go here. Someone says, what is the status of the multifamily zoning proposal? What are the major relevant pros and cons? When was the proposed rezoning of single-family homes first announced publicly? I learned about it less than a month ago from a neighbor. I don't spend all my time checking the city's website. How about a citywide old-fashioned letter? Why are you trying to push this proposal through by December 1st? Has the mayor, city council conducted any site visits in Beverly Hills, Northridge with potential developers to determine specific impact of building fourplexes on current residential lots? Is there a detailed map of Beverly Hills, Northridge of which lots fourplexes could be built on? What is the percentage of lots in Beverly Hills, Northridge the new zoning would impact? I strongly oppose the rezoning of single-family homes. The city's development track of the past 10 years has not addressed nor solved the essential housing needs of its residents, a need that was acknowledged in the 2014 master plan. Rezoning will have no impact in solving the city's essential housing problems and will create more environmental, sewer, air quality, lack of teachers, and other quality of life issues. I strongly object to the rezoning of R25, R5, R12, R20. Has the city conducted the required studies of transportation impact, conservation, natural resources, schools, air quality, and environmental and other quality of life studies? If so, please publish them publicly. And then someone else said, where can I access the recent impact studies required by the Virginia Code in relation to rezoning of single-family homes? Councilwoman Gaskins. While she's thinking about that, it's halftime. It's 16-0, so you are really not missing anything by being here. We got a lot more scoring that's happening here. So, at least by the home team. So
I believe in being honest and transparent. So whoever asks all of these questions, I probably am not going to be able to get to all of them. So I will do my best, and hopefully, if my colleagues capture one that I miss, they can learn it. So I guess the first thing I would start with was there was a question around when was this announced. So I think it's important to kind of take us back. As part of the various conversations that we have been having around housing, we had our housing master plan process. And in that process, it was identified, I believe, 12 different policies or 12 different tools is the way I like to think of it, that our residents, our staff, and those who participated in that process thought were important to be able to create a healthier housing market in Alexandria. Previous councils were looking at those sort of one at a time. So one of those policies would have been the ADU policy that was passed several years ago, or the co-living policy. I think what we started to hear from the community is this is a lot to follow. If every 6 months you're putting out a different policy, how do I not only track that policy, but how do I understand the interactions and the connections between these different policies? And so this council, we said, let's take a look and let's pull this together. Let's look at it comprehensively and start to think about what's the full bucket of tools. So the full bucket of tools are these other 9. So to the question of when did this come about, I think 2012 would have been when these, but someone can correct my years, would have been the first time that at least single-family zoning, as well as the other 8 that we're looking at, were sort of put on the table as part of this package and have continued to be a part of the conversation since then. I'd say in terms of the question about what's the status of the multifamily proposals, that one's a little tricky for me to answer, and I do know our Director of Planning, Carl Moritz, is in the back, and the reason why it's tricky is because there isn't just one proposal that affects that. We have one of the things that looks in there is our residential multifamily zone, so the RMF zone. There is a particular policy we're looking at that really makes it clearer that in places in our small area plans where we have said that we want to allow mild to high density, that is a place where that tool would be allowed. There are other parts that we have considered that also impact multifamily development. So somebody talked about office conversions earlier. So I feel like it would be disingenuous for me to tell you kind of what's the status without having a lot more time to go through what's the status of each of the things that would impact multifamily, which I'm sure we'd be happy to do at a different time. The next piece about timing and pushing this through, I can't speak for everyone, but what I can tell you is every time that we come together as a council, there's some land use related conversation. That's probably the primary responsibility that we have and the number of cases we look at. There are a lot of different housing developments or housing related conversations happening in this city. I don't want to continue to go forward where I believe that we are truly in a crisis, and a crisis deserves some urgency to address. I don't want to continue to approve things without having the full suite of tools available to me to address those. And so for me, and others can weigh in, the importance of this timeline for me is I don't want the next thing to come up. I don't want the next, let's say Eisenhower or other places where there's real opportunities for us to get additional affordable housing. I don't want that to come up without us being able to have the tools that we need and don't currently have the authority to execute to be able to make sure that those deliver on the results that we've talked about. The last thing I would just touch on, and maybe somebody else can pick up some of the other pieces, is I think one of the questions was, the single family proposals, which are not a rezone, but the proposals for changes in the single family zones, that's not going to solve our affordable housing crisis. And I think you're right. No one tool is going to solve the scale of the problem that we face. That is why we are looking at 9. And I'll be honest, that's probably why we're going to continue to have this conversation next year and the following year and the year after. There are constantly going to be new tools and things we need to explore. So what we are looking at in the single family zones is part of it. Is it the overall solution to everything we face? No, but I think it's an important part of what is the housing market, what are the options we're trying to have in neighborhoods across our city. And if you take that off the table, it's not, I think that limits us and constrains us. And this is the part where we should be having the conversation about what are all the things available to us. There are maps. I have not specifically looked at the map and singled out Beverly Hills or the other neighborhoods that were mentioned, but you can go to our website and you can look at maps of our zoning code. You can look at maps of kind of proposed changes. You can also understand the methodology behind which we worked with, our staff worked with real estate consultants to be able to map and predict potential properties that might be, not properties, because they didn't look at individual properties, but potential areas or types of lots that might be impacted by this proposal.
Councilmember Bagley.
Thank you. And yeah, that was a lot to try to break down, so I appreciate my colleagues sort of going through it piece by piece. I wanted to, one thing that her answer flagged for me is another good example of why do this now and under this schedule, and it reminded me of our green building policy. So in this is my first term on council, and building by building we have been holding various developers to negotiations over that particular building or that particular CDD, that district, and can we get a better EUI, can we get a little more of this, can you put solar on the roof, these sorts of things. And what you realize is it's not the most effective and efficient process to negotiate these things a parcel at a time and a project at a time. And so that's why we've put our green building policy back in the work plan. Staff is going to be in our Office of Climate Change is actively working on that. And they're going to be bringing it to us next year and updated. And the reason for that is in recognition of we need more tools to address things, and doing them a parcel at a time is not the ideal way to do it, doing it a CDD at a time. So by putting the remaining 9 proposals that were all floated years ago together in one place, we have the ability to talk about sort of the totality of impacts and how these things will work together, how things like the RMF zone expansion and the reconsideration of parking minimums, sort of 2 different things, but they will overlay each other, how these things will work together. So I think, just to expand, on that concept, why all of this all together in this time frame. I also wanted to switch gears and to dive a little bit into the single family home comments and questions. I wanted to, just as a factual matter, raised for the room to the extent people might not be aware, the building envelope has not changed. I think some of us might even have been frustrated by that, or underwhelmed a little bit, as one planning commissioner said. But the bottom line is a parcel can still only have essentially the same building envelope. Setback has remained the same under this proposal. Open space has remained the same. Stormwater infrastructure requirements are all the same. Carl, can you give me a quick nod if I'm okay? But I think it's a key thing, and I say that in good faith to anybody anybody trying to follow this process. So if a lot is big enough, so the same size building can be a duplex or a quadplex, but you're going to have the same distance from the street, the same amount of grass surrounding it, all those same things. So for those of you who are genuinely trying to understand what's happening here, this would be a larger lot with a same size building envelope, but housing 2 families rather than just 1 in the same space. And I think it's just a core thing to bear in mind, and it's also why the proposed impacts as described in the documentation is roughly, I think, 168 new units proposed over 10 years in single-family zones, which is about 34% of our city. Do I have that number right? So, if you picture our small city, 15 square miles, right? 34% of it, roughly in the middle, is zoned in a way right now that is, I'm just going to say a number, if there's 500 houses there, that's all it ever can be, basically. And the rest of the city is where more can go. And so what we're trying to do, I think gently, in a fairly incremental way, 168 potential new units over 10 years, is to at least bring that 34% of the city into the effort the rest of the city is making to create some more supply. So, I hope I've got most of those facts and numbers right, but just wanted to give that context, that building envelope's not changing, and it's a relatively gentle amount of density or increased proposed within, that the city did study. There were references to various studies, and while I can't speak to exactly the scope and design of each particular one, there was studies done to sort of give an informed prediction of the potential impact.
Councilman McPike.
Yes, thank you. I'd like to sort of build on what Councilmember Bagley was saying in terms of the sort of linkedness of all of this. I think that as we proceed through this discussion of zoning for housing, we're going to find that a lot of the conversation, perhaps the majority of the conversation, is going to be about one of the smallest tools that we're considering, which is the revisions to single-family homes. If we look at the set of tools that we're looking at, the townhouse zone tools, the sort of we have 2 different types of townhouse zones in the city, and then a bunch of things that look like townhouses that aren't treated like townhouses, and we're trying to figure out a way to harmonize all of that to make it more consistent and easier to create townhouses in certain parts of the city. If we look at our office to residential conversions proposal there, that has the potential to generate a significant number of units with a tool that is being proposed by the staff to allow us to get some of those units to be at locked-in affordability levels, which is really difficult to do just through the planning, through the zoning tool. So that's a very innovative strategy. If we look at the desire to bring housing options into industrial zones to lock in the very good housing model that we got negotiated with the redeveloper of the PRGS site, the CDD there, to apply that to future CDDs while we still have capacity for future CDDs. I'm using an acronym, you might not know what that means. A coordinated development district, which is where we're redeveloping a large parcel of land in a way that incorporates a lot of different elements, housing, retail, the infrastructure impacts thereof. I mean, those are going to be the tools that generate the probably the most numerical units in this consideration. The transit-oriented development that we've talked about is something that I think that we've all talked about in this city, wanting to see more density, more housing options near our metro stations where we know people can live there and really lower their greenhouse gas emissions impact, that it can help us achieve our goals to reduce our climate change contribution from the city, by putting people in spaces where they can live right next to the transit, that can get them into DC if for some reason they wanted to leave Alexandria and back to do the things they need to do during the day. But with all that, it all interlinks with this proposal in the single-family home zones, because while it's not going to produce the most units, 160-something, and I believe it was 66 lots that was projected might be renovated over the next 10 years to be more dense. But the kinds of housing that would be produced in the single-family zones is the kind of housing that we would want. It's, duplexes aren't just 2 homes together. They're often 2 purchasable homes. And we talk a lot in the city about the lack of lower-cost purchasable housing in Alexandria. And duplexes are a way to help foster some of that and give you access to a yard for your kid or your dog or whatever that you're looking for there. The sort of quadplexes we're talking about, now we're approaching things that look and feel like the garden apartments that we talk about in areas like Delray that people really like, and that gentle density there. And also, these are the units that you get to that have the potential to be affordable to police officers, to teachers, to firefighters, the folks that we often talk about wanting to make affordability options available in the city, but who actually make too much to qualify for most of our subsidized affordable housing in Alexandria. So that's why this tool is important, and why it is part of the interlinked nature of the 8 tools that the city is considering moving forward on. And in response to the other question that was asked, I live in an R8 home right by Alexandria Hospital.
All right, Councilman Aguirre.
So this actually doesn't have to do with the question or zoning for housing, but I think something else in parallel that we have to be potentially looking at is revisiting our approach to Airbnbs. It's been an issue, and I think it's time to revisit it.
All right, Councilman Aguirre. Next question is going to Councilman Aguirre. At the September 14th zoning for housing meeting, Carl Moritz, who's hiding in the back, said the city is tracking plans to construct 40,000 new housing units. They should generate 60 to 80,000 new residents. So, 1, exactly how many new people is the city planning for? 2, what exactly are staff and council doing to ensure that we have the right budget to support the right type and amount of city services for this tremendous population increase, e.g. police, fire, EMS, code enforcement, parks and rec, social services, and administrative support, etc.?
So first off, whenever we have a new development, especially a large new development, all of these things are taken into consideration, right? How many people are coming in? What's going to be the impact on our sanitary sewer? What's going to be the impact on our schools? What's going to be the impact on parking, traffic? All of these things are taken into consideration. One of my big things is we can't be developing things if we don't have the infrastructure in place. If we don't have the infrastructure in place, we're basically going to collapse in on ourselves. Now, I think what a lot of people don't realize is our staffing levels as a city are basically at 2010 levels, and we have 20,000 plus more residents. So there are serious things that we have to take into consideration when we talk about services provided, the level of service that's provided. Personally, I think this is a very, very well-run city. You could compare it to some of the other jurisdictions in the area, and it's you don't get the same level of service, in my opinion. But we need to hire more folks. If we're going to keep up with an increasing population, increasing demands on all the services, we're going to need to make some tough decisions. And part of what we're trying to do is create more of a tax base that we can utilize to be able to provide these services, but it's always a trade-off. And the other thing that's related to this is, of course, our commercial tax base, which I think everyone up here would be in agreement that we haven't been able to diversify enough to alleviate some of the pressure on our residents, because the main portion of our tax base is on the residents, the real estate tax. So these are all things that we're taking into consideration, but there's still a lot of work that needs to be done.
Okay, Councilmember Bagley, this one's for you. More people are working from home. Has there been a new study to account for that? How will traffic be addressed on Beauregard and Duke with this change and the new businesses, hospital, offices going in at Landmark? Alexandria teachers and police don't meet the income levels for proposed housing. Why?
Okay, so there were sort of so there's 2 questions in there, right? One was about sort of traffic study, and the other is about income.
Yep, it was,
Okay.
changes of people working from home, traffic at Beauregard and Duke because of these changes. I assume, I don't know
Yeah.
if this is zoning for housing changes, but, and then Alexandria teachers and police don't meet the income levels for proposed new housing. Why?
Okay. Let me first, so to speak to the traffic piece first, I love this question because I think it's an important one. Our traffic patterns have become sort of disappointingly, they are disappointingly moving in the wrong direction in a lot of ways. We have people who are going to work less often, but choosing to drive when they do so, sort of counterintuitively. If we're talking about commutes, if we're talking about interstate traffic, sort of main road traffic. We are wrestling with that. I think a lot of transit agencies are wrestling with that. I think how to get people, even if they're only going in one day a week, because ironically they're finding that parking is easier. So it's easier to find a place to park where you're going because fewer people are going, so they're driving, but then traffic is worse. So I think this is something being studied. I don't know if our test is studying that specifically, but I know transit agencies, I serve on MVTC, the mayor serves on MBTA, are looking at this issue. Ironically, at the same time, vehicle miles traveled within zones of the city are actually down. So I mentioned, I live in North Old Town. We have more people living in North Old Town, but demonstrably fewer single vehicle miles traveled. And it's because of the nature of development. People are walking to the Harris Teeter, or they're taking the Dash bus, which is free and reorganized. So we have sort of two trends that are moving away from each other. And I know that we are studying it in neighborhood ways. We are examining this every time we approve a new development, and we have to predict impacts. But specifically tied to work from home changes, I don't know. So let me whoever's asked the question, I appreciate it. Something to follow up on. I think, but I think to my colleague's point about how do we account for this? We do account for it when we vote on CDDs, or when we approve an SUP that involves substantial development. It predicts traffic impacts. We do a parking analysis. We do schools analysis. So that is cooked in to sort of developments that have a size and scope that would call for that kind of analysis. Shifting over to the income question related to teachers and police, since I'm not exactly sure what was meant by they don't qualify for current housing, if you mean affordable housing, sort of committed affordable, it really does depend on the project itself. Because to be fair, most of the criticism we receive is actually that our committed affordable housing is at the 60 and 80% level, which in Alexandria is $100,000 a year. It's $80,000 a year. So and again, I can't speak to every teacher's salary and every APD salary, but those projects that have 60 and 80% affordability actually would capture somebody earning 75, 80, 85, up to 100,000. Conversely, if what we're talking about is our current zoning and our housing efforts to create sort of a market affordability do not address teachers and firefighters, acknowledged. I mean, and that's the gap that really is missing in the city right now, and that we are trying to create with some of these supply side issues. So if what the question is getting at is, if I earn $100,000, I'm both earning too much potentially for a 60-40 committed affordable, but I can't afford to buy the entry level home in Alexandria at $500,000. So part of what we are trying to create with these 9 tools is more diversity in the purchasing range, to make possible a duplex that might be 500 or 400,000, which I appreciate is not something I could afford and is not something a lot of people could afford. But so we're coming at it from both ends. We're trying to put money into creating deeper affordability at the 30 and 40% level in our rental units, and then create supply on the zoning for housing side on the purchasable level at the 600, 500, 400, which I still hear how high that is, but that doesn't really exist much in the city. I mean, $400,000 does not, commonly exist as a purchasable price point. Please correct me, any of my colleagues, if I'm astray.
No, I just bought a house a couple years ago. You're correct.
Councilman Aguirre, and then Councilwoman Gaskins.
I just wanted to add a little bit more context to my colleagues' comments in response. When we talk about the AMI, the area median income, the AMI for one individual is about $100,000. And Director Garvey, I believe for a family of 4, is it 130 or is it 140? 130? So $130,000 for a family of 4 is the area median income. That's high. That's really high. And to give you a little bit more perspective, the average income for the individuals, the 170 individuals that we have in the RISE program, is $20,000.
Okay, Councilwoman Gaskins.
Thank you. I was just going to, kind of further emphasize what was just said here, which is I think that one of the things that makes this conversation so confusing and sometimes hard to dive into is I think many of us have been taught to think that affordable automatically means poor. And in a city like ours and in cities across the country, there's such a spectrum of need and folks that we are trying to make sure have the housing that they want in the neighborhoods, in the communities that they want. All of us would go out and say Alexandria is a great place. And so for everybody else who believes that, those who want to stay here in this great place, I think that's what this is about, trying to make this possible. And so when we look at affordability, we look at, are you paying less than 30% of your income on housing? And can you still afford your medications, your transportation, your childcare, the other things you need? And for so many folks, that's just not a reality. And so that's why there's so many, not so many, I shouldn't say so many, but that's why there are different conversations happening around how do you get this purchasable middle zone? How do you get more committed affordable? How do you get more just units in the overall housing market that we have? And I just wanted to give like an illustration of this became actually very personal to me recently. So my husband and I probably combined work 4 jobs. We are also clearly serving our city. We want to stay here. We love this place. We live in Cameron Station. That is the neighborhood that we have fallen in love with. That is where our community is. That's where my neighbors are. And I now have 2 kids. As my family expanded, the condo we lived in was no longer the right place for us to stay. You know, I can't have a 3-year-old boy who wants to jump off the walls at all times, sort of living in this condo. It wasn't working. And so we started thinking about then what is the next option for us. At the same time, I'll be very honest, we spend almost $4,000 on childcare a month. And that doesn't include the babysitters and the extra support that makes it possible for me to sit up here. That's also not my kid going to the top of the line best daycare in the city. We chose it because it was more affordable. Now, when we were looking for a place to live, we knew we wanted to stay in Cameron Station because, again, that's where my community is. The next option above our condo to be able to get another bedroom is going at over $900,000. With my 4 jobs, with our childcare, that was off the table. We are now renters because that is the only way that we could find that middle bucket for us to be able to stay, again, in the neighborhood and the community we want to serve. And I think that is just my personal illustration, but that's a lot of sometimes when people say to me, well, why aren't you getting more affordable? Or why aren't you getting this? We are, but for different tiers and different spaces. I would like to be able, in my family, I was one of the only homeowners. Now I'm not anymore. When you talk about wealth, when you talk about all these other dynamics that happen in a place, and so when we talk about our firefighters, our teachers, our grocery store workers, anybody in this community, if they want that option for their family, many of those options just don't exist. And so it is creating all of those different types. And it may not be the way we've imagined what affordable means, but it is affordable to people who make this community.
All right, we have 4 minutes left. I'm going to try to squeeze in some quick questions, so 30-second answers on these, please. There's 2 factual ones I'm just going to read and answer. 1, what is the process for a claim against the city? Who makes a decision on the claim? How much does the city have set aside for claims? Go to alexandriava.gov/risk. The whole process is there. We have an outside risk administrator. The city attorney advises the process, and we can look up the budget numbers. There have been stormwater runoff problems on properties from Seminary to Rosser for 65 years, as the city never built the storm sewer pipe that was promised. Please drop me an email. Happy to follow up with you with our staff directly on that one. Councilman Chapman, 2 questions. Has the city posted signs in the affected neighborhoods regarding the possible change of zoning? What newspapers have they received public notice? Should the new zoning changes be presented to the voters as a referendum? This would be more citizen-involved way to make changes.
Signage and notification is going out about this process. I think as we continue to move forward with what we're doing, you'll probably see more of that communication. This is not something that we are trying to hide. This is something that we are trying to let everyone know that we are doing and undertaking so that we can have engagement with you. This is not something we are trying to hide. And so if there is a communication tool that you think we are not using, please let us know and that we can talk with staff about how we do that effectively. The second part of the question was?
Referendum.
Referendum. Your referendum, frankly, is us. You elect us to make decisions on a lot of issues. We cannot predict always what issue is going to come in front of us over the course of a term. And so every 3 years, you have an opportunity to have a referendum on council, individual members on council, and council as a whole. if you do not like the work we do, let us know that by unelecting us from office.
All right, Vice Mayor, what options is the City Council exploring to help with more affordable rentals and homeownership besides building new buildings?
What?
Besides building new buildings, basically, how do you expand rentals and affordable homeownership without building new buildings?
I think we've already gone over some of this, right?
Fair?
Okay, there you go. I mean,
All right.
that, asked and answered.
Final question, sorry, you want to jump in there, Councilmember Bagley?
Okay, go ahead.
for it. Go for it.
If I understand the question, I would just volunteer that we have opportunities where like Madden Homes is a good example, where we're redeveloping that is existing housing that is preserved, there's a right to return, but when we rebuild it, we're rebuilding bigger with more units at better, at better standards. So that's one way to, without sort of technically building more, we're taking a parcel and keeping it. The other thing that we can do is we can buy down units in buildings that are like developers going to build it anyway. So we say to them, this is where we get into our bonus structures. This thing is going to be built anyway. We'll let you build X more in exchange for committing affordability within the building. So I think that kind of is responsive to that question, because it's not us just rampantly building new. It's recognizing there's by right development happening. How do we induce within that by right context some committed affordability?
All right, Councilman McPike, you're going to get the last question here.
All right.
There's two, really. They're related. I saw that a seasonal ice skating rink was proposed for Landmark Mall redevelopment. Did the city approve this? Secondly, currently inside opportunities to play pickleball are limited with only one evening available. What will we do to extend pickleball opportunities in the city?
Well, if you
Councilman
put a
McPike.
tent over the ice rink, you could play pickleball indoors. No, the ice rink was part of the DSUP that came before council yesterday. It's not going to be an ice rink year-round. It's only going to be an ice rink during the winter months, and they will have a different kind of covering and usage for that space, but that was approved yesterday. Pickleball, there's going to be, not indoor, but there will be new pickleball spaces at the redeveloped Landmark Mall site as well. We approved that yesterday as well. And pickleball is great. It's the fastest growing sport in the world, but remember the law of small numbers when you think about that percentage. We're looking for more opportunities to make sure that people who want to play pickleball in the city and people who want to play tennis in the city have the ability to do so.
All right, I assume my mother is hiding somewhere in the audience. It says, I am impressed at the knowledgeable and articulate each council member has been. Also, the way the mayor distributed the questions and how well the microphones and PA system worked. Good job. I want to thank our staff for their work in helping us do the PA system and organize all the questions. Thank you all of you for all these questions. We got through a nice good chunk of questions, and that's thanks to our council members doing a great job of answering questions with crisp answers. We had a couple of follow-ups we will take on. There were a few questions. I think we covered the themes of these few questions that I didn't actually read, but if anybody has any follow-ups, please come up and we're happy to answer them individually. So six more questions. So all right, thank you all so much for being here. We appreciate it. Have a wonderful weekend. Thank you.